Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unleashed. One of the unexpected outcomes of running for governor was growing in my faith. I met pastors across the state of all denominations and all sizes of congregations. I visited close to 100 churches on various Sundays, encouraging their communities to get engaged and vote their values. It was a true blessing. As I celebrated Easter last weekend with my family, as the church filled with voices celebrating Jesus, I was reminded of how powerful our faith can be when all seems lost. And Colorado is lost right now. Our beautiful state has been labeled one of the least religious states in America. Only a third of Coloradans say that religion is important in their daily lives and attend religious services each week. Over 60% of Coloradans consider themselves Christian, even if they are not actively engaged. Can you imagine the difference in our elections if even a third of adults in Colorado voted their Christian values, if they honored the religion that they practice? Well, 1 in 3 Christians do not vote consistently. That's a problem. Think of how much our politicians influence our families, our schools, our media, entertainment, and our small businesses. To live out our Christian faith, we must participate in the political process. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetuate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it." It's time for Christians to stand up and enter the battle. We are most definitely in the midst of a spiritual battle for our children, for our lands, and for our future. I recently read a book by Eric Metaxas, Letter to the American Church. In his writings, he talks about the haunting similarities between today's American church and the German church of the 1930s. Specifically, the silence of the church as it faced attacks on all fronts.
Wake-up call to the American church. The Nazis took power in Germany and went on to kill 6 million Jews. Could something like that eventually happen right here in the United States? Well, our next guest is urging fellow Christians to repent of their silence in the face of evil before it's too late. Eric Metaxas is a journalist, author, and host of the Eric Metaxas radio show. His new book is Letter to the American Church. He joins us now to set us straight. Eric, always good to talk with you, and I've read your book. It's wonderful, by the way. I recommend it. It seems, though, more like a thesis, perhaps a bit like Martin Luther's 95 Theses or writings by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and you spend a significant amount of time discussing Bonhoeffer, detailing what happened in Germany during the 1930s. So explain the similarity, the parallels that you see happening today right here in the United States.
Well, I'll simply say this. It is the silence of the American church on a host of issues today that many people say, oh, that's not a gospel-related issue. I don't want to be divisive. I want to be political. It is that silence which directly parallels the silence of German Christians in the early 30s. And it led to the satanic evil of the Nazi takeover of that culture where they crushed the church, they silenced the church. But it's because the church allowed them to do it by being silent. And there were many voices at that time giving theological reasons why we should not speak out on these issues. We're not supposed to be political, they said. It's nonsense. It is not biblical. And at a time like this, it's the voice of the devil. But the point is, Christian leaders who are being used by these evil forces, they have no idea what lies ahead. So it's easy for us to look back at the Germans and say, wow, they got it wrong. They should have spoken up. Bonhoeffer was right. I'm with them. But we're doing the same thing in the American church today. And there are voices, leaders in the church today that are being silent. In fact, most leaders in the American church are being silent because some leaders in the American church are actually advocating silence in the face of evil. They know not what they do. I want to give them grace. And I wrote the book to try to reach those people and to say to them, please understand that by not speaking up against everything that you see, by being afraid to be political, you have been silenced. The enemy is using theology to confuse us and to say, well, we're not supposed to talk about that kind of stuff. Romans 13. The same thing happened in Germany. The church was silent. Bonhoeffer and others knew this was not biblical. This was not what God was calling them to do. But the church hesitated enough and kept silent enough for long enough for the Nazis to utterly take over and really do things so evil that we look back, we think, well, that can never happen again. And what I'm saying in this book is that we already see it happening. Tremendous devastation in this nation on innumerable issues, and the church is silent.
And you write that Bonhoeffer addressed the question of leadership. He talked about servant leadership, Jesus taking on the role of the lowly slave when he washed the feet of his disciples. And you say Bonhoeffer was suggesting that a leader is not leading as God would lead when he or she idolizes self. They become misleaders. Do you see that happening today in America? How is that being played out in the church and in politics?
20 years ago, if somebody said, well, don't be political because we have different kinds of people in our congregation, you know, but you'd say today, the world has changed. Today, the left in America is advocating for cultural Marxism, which is atheism. It's atheistic. So when people are talking about a critical race theory, when they're talking about the transgender madness, all of these things are new. And if the church was silent 20 years ago, well, that was one thing. But to say today that, well, I don't want to be political, how can you not be political? William Wilberforce, about whom I've written and I mentioned in the book along with Bonhoeffer, he was dealing with the slavery issue and the slave trade. He knew it was satanic, and he was political in saying we've got to do what we can because we're Christians. And when people say, but you're being political, he would say, no, I'm simply doing what God commands me to do, to be a voice for the voiceless. The African slaves don't have a voice. If I don't speak, God will judge me. If I don't speak for the unborn today, God will judge me.
Eric, what specifically then do Christians need to do? Do we need to attend school board meetings, run for office? I mean, beyond just speaking up, what should we do?
Well, we need to do everything. In other words, I think that if when we talk about the church, we're talking about multiplied millions of Americans who each has a different calling. So we just have to ask God, Lord, what would you have me to do? But do something. We had pulpits on fire before the revolution, advocating against tyranny. They weren't afraid to be political. Before the Civil War in this country, we had pulpits preaching against the evils of slavery, and people said to them, you're being political, shut up, shut up. We must not shut up. We must speak. Time is very, very short.
Okay, speaking up for truth, faith in action, living out our faith. The book is Letter to the American Church. Eric Metaxas, thank you for setting us straight today. We appreciate it, Eric. Good book.
God bless you. Thank you.
By choosing silence, German pastors facilitated the rise of the Nazis, and the innocent blood of millions is on their hands. The current complicity of the American church, especially its pastors, leads to similar red-handed guilt. Those who ignore the lessons of history are being condemned to repeat its mistakes. We see history repeating itself right before our very eyes, but it's not too late. The church has an obligation to speak out about evil, including government evil, and to resist the state whenever necessary. We as Christians should speak against the church when it has gotten too close to the state or when it turns its head to the evil going on. I think back on the campaign trail to a night when Danny and I met a very influential pastor and his wife for dinner. They were open about their hesitation to support us as they were traditionally staunch Democrats. However, they were also not happy about the current leadership, so they were open to meeting with us. After a lengthy yet productive discussion over dinner, I turned to the pastor's wife, who had been very quiet during the dinner. I asked for her thoughts. She said that it would be very difficult to support us, as she believed it was a woman's right to have an abortion even in the last trimester. My heart sank. Here's a very powerful pastor's wife saying she supports a baby being aborted all the way up until its birthday. I still can't understand how she squares that with God, especially as a leader in the faith community. I will always choose to be on the right side of God versus the right side of politics, even if I lose an election over it. Metaxas in his book pushes back on the lie that fighting evil as a pastor, as a Christian, politicizes Christianity. I heard that over and over from pastors that were unwilling to engage or let us come visit or speak. My own pastor of over 10 years, Jim Bergen at Flatirons Church, one of the largest church communities in Colorado, kept avoiding getting together with me. At the same time, he was preaching to his large congregation to get involved, to not sit on the sidelines, to fight the woke indoctrination in the schools and the intentional separation of the family. He wasn't the only one. Many, many pastors refused to get involved or walk the talk, or even meet with us. The church has a critical role in the culture of a nation, especially America, a nation that was founded on its faith. Christians must stand up and engage and speak boldly. Now is not the time to be quiet. Silence is not an option for the faith community right now. In Colorado, abortion until a baby's birth date is celebrated. In Colorado, our schools are teaching children that parents are not to be trusted, that government is God. In Colorado, drugs are replacing faith. Suicide and addiction are skyrocketing, and we are moving farther and farther away from the one thing that works to heal brokenness, God. The Wall Street Journal put a poll out last week that showed that religion, patriotism, community, and having children have dropped dramatically in importance, while the importance of money has grown. Selfishness has become a value. If you don't have a relationship with God, country, or community, all you have left is yourself. How terribly sad for our children, for our society. No wonder we are in such a mess. Christians have forgotten the power of our faith when we come together. If 64% of voters in Colorado are Christians, that's 2.8 million of the 4.4 million registered voters. That number wins elections all the time, hands down. As said in Romans 8:31, if God is for us, who can be against us? Churches must not, as Metaxas denounces, retreat to a focus on the gospel as though God has nothing to say about public evil. Bonhoeffer, another gentleman that Metaxas wrote about from Nazi Germany, said the Christian church was obligated to help any victims of the state. If the state refused to change course and do the right thing, it was the solemn obligation of Christians to take action. They were not just supposed to protest verbally and to help the victims, but were also supposed to become actively political, to shove a stick in the spokes of the wheel in the rumbling machine of the state. Few pastors are volunteering for stick duty right now. We are headed into the spiral of silence, a phenomenon that occurs when people see a culture slipping towards tyranny but refuse to speak. The longer people hesitate, the more the price of speaking rises. As the price rises, fewer people choose to speak, and the price of speaking rises again, and so on, until a nation is silenced. Metaxas sees this happening in North America, and I saw it firsthand on the campaign trail. The longer pastors wait, the longer Christians wait, the harder it becomes to say anything about the dangers and evils of what's happening. A few days ago, Schaefer Parker wrote a thoughtful review of Metaxas' call to action in the Western Standard. Wait, then what must we do? We must see the one who is truth as our standard, as our battle flag for truth. Then we are to rally to that battle flag, to Jesus himself. Is Metaxas really calling for us to think of ourselves as Christian soldiers marching as to war? Yes, I think he is. We must learn to combine truth with love. And because Jesus is a person, we must move beyond creeds and statements of faith. We must speak the truth in love, not theoretically, but aimed at real situations and always for Jesus' sake. The one thing we must not do is remain silent. Metaxas asks, is your pastor talking about these things? Are you? That's something you must do. Your pastor must do. We can't stay quiet. 64% of Colorado voters are Christians. A third of voters go to church here. It's time to stand up for those values we hold dear. Give this book, A Letter to the American Church, to your friends of faith and to your pastor, and then ask them to talk about it. Christians in Colorado have the power to single-handedly return our state to the beautiful place it was. But we must speak up, and now, and act. Act first in our families. Instill these values in our kids and grandkids. If they are not okay, nothing is okay. Start our schools and churches. Get them out of the public schools if we need to. Get your kids off the screens and off social media. Do everything in your power to keep your children and grandchildren from using drugs. Have dinner together as a family. Have tough conversations. Be real and honest about the state of the world with our children. They can handle it. They're tough. They need to be prepared for this battle. Next, act within your church community. Take the lead at your church. Build a culture impact team. Organize. Teach your congregation to register voters, to ballot harvest, to be poll watchers, to be election judges, to run for office. Speak fearlessly about politics with your family, your friends, and your pastor. Give them the book, Eric Metaxas' book, A Letter to the American Church, and follow up to make sure they read it. Hold them accountable for staying silent if they choose to. You can also act by getting involved politically. Truth and Liberty Coalition is hosting trainings for candidates and campaign workers through our churches. They are guiding churches on how to protect their 501c3 status and still be bold. Go to their website, check out their resources, and send the link to your pastor. We have moved from a culture that affirmed and agreed with Christianity to one that is actively hostile to it. Things have changed, and so the church must change too. Pastors must change, and Christians must change. We might look back and think, why didn't more Christians speak out back then to stop Hitler? Well, in Germany, in the early 30s, 3,000 of the 18,000 Protestant pastors were willing to stand bravely against the Nazis. 3,000 of the 18,000. On the other side, 3,000 were totally pro-Hitler. In the middle were 12,000 who wouldn't commit, who knew what was right but didn't take a stand. They made it possible for Nazis to destroy Germany and kill millions of people. Look at our silence during the 2 years of lockdowns that destroyed our kids. Most people went along with all of it, even criticizing or canceling those who questioned it. We're still being quiet. Wake up, be noisy, get loud. It's our duty to God. Metaxas closes his book by saying, "Heaven looks to you and to me to do the right thing." John Hancock, the first signer of the Declaration of Independence, said, "Resistance to tyranny becomes the Christian and social duty of each individual. Continue steadfast and with the proper sense of your dependence on God. Nobly defend these rights which heaven gave and no man ought to take from us." Are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the right thing, my friends? Run into that fire. We have God on our side. Now I'd like to turn to an interview with a friend of mine, Derrick Wilburn, who's been a warrior on the front lines for our faith, for our principles, our values in Colorado. Derrick has a lot to say about some recent developments in El Paso County with the vice chair down there and a speech he gave. I'm very excited and proud to welcome Derrick to the show. Well, hey, Derrick, I'm so excited to have you on the show as the previous vice chair of the Colorado Republican Party in Colorado, as the podcast host of Red Ink, your own podcast, and also just an all-around badass conservative in Colorado. I so appreciate all the work you do.
I am going to print business cards with that title from now on.
I think
Colorado
that's a good idea.
Badass Conservative. I like it. I like it. Now it's getting kind of scary how far back you and I go, man. I mean, you're not getting any younger, man. We've got some years behind us now, don't we?
We do. We've been on a crazy journey over the past probably decade since we've met and seen a lot of ups and downs in the party and seen our country go through a lot, seen the Colorado go through a lot of transition. Oh my goodness, what the heck is going on in our state and why the attack on Christianity?
Those are two very different questions.
Yeah.
So the way you ask them chronologically is the way they have to be answered. What happened in the state first, the attack on Christianity second, because that's how it always happens. I'm working on a series on Red Ink right now, and I've done this speech live. You might have heard it. I can't remember all the places we've been, but and if anybody wants to hear it, they can reach out to me. But 6 things that happen when leftists assume complete control of government, like they have in Colorado. So there is no conservative counterbalance whatsoever. Liberals can push through whatever they want, whenever they want. They don't need any conservative votes. In fact, in some cases, they don't even need all the Democrat votes. They so have the numbers that they can control the agenda. And one of the things that happens, I go through 6 things, and they're inarguable. People can argue whether they're good or bad, and liberals will argue, yeah, that's what happens, but those things are good. The 6th thing that happens is church attendance dwindles. So the community of faith begins to shrink, whether you're talking about a municipality, whether you're talking about a city, a state, or a nation, whether you're talking about Seattle, San Francisco, Portland, California, Colorado, and New Hampshire, or France, Germany, where you have single ideological rule. The left runs everything. The community of faith and church attendance always begins to shrink. It dwindles away. And we're seeing that right now.
Why does that happen? And you can go through the other 5 steps if you like. I think people would.
You won't get any talk time on this podcast.
Quickly go through them and then tell people where they can read more or hear more about that.
Number 1, taxes go up. Number 2, things get banned. Liberals, they love banning things. Number 3, the rich get rich, the poor get poor. When liberals assume complete control of government, you begin to see a massive separation of the economic classes. You've got lots of people in Ferraris, lots of people sleeping under bridges. Number 4, crime goes up. Inevitably, look around the country at the places that are liberal dominated, where there is no conservative counterbalance right now. Everybody is seeing this happening in our country. Number 5, everybody gets stoned. When liberals have complete control, policies get enacted that make it easier for society to intoxicate itself. And Colorado led the charge on this in 2012 with medical marijuana, became recreational marijuana. When I moved to this state 20 years ago, you couldn't buy alcohol on Sundays. Remember that?
Yes.
We were red back then. Then we drifted purple. Then we became blue. That went away. The grocery stores only sold near beer, right? That 3.2 beer with a maximum alcohol content of 3.2%. Then that went away. Now grocery stores, like every other liberal state, are beginning to sell wine and spirits as well. Used to be we had no marijuana. Then you had medical marijuana. And people will go to the dispensaries and, do you have a hangnail? Do you have frequent headaches? You know, the phony doctor would write you a prescription. Finally, we did away with that. The more liberal you become, the more policies get enacted to enable society to intoxicate itself. And number 6 is church attendance begins to dwindle. The community of faith shrinks. You look at places like, let's just take Portland, Seattle, hotbeds of Antifa. Everybody knows what's going on in those places. How many residents of inner city Portland would you guess regularly attend Sunday worship services?
Probably low.
Not a whole lot.
Right.
Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. And so then you get into the degradation of society. So you take a person like that, one of these Antifa people, who the Bible is nothing but it's just a series of made up stories. I mean, it's not even that to them. They place their hand on that and swear to tell the truth in a court of law. Does that mean anything to them? Hey, I just swore in a Bible. Not a single thing. So you begin to see this, and this happens everywhere, every time. In the United States of America, the state that has the least amount of people who self-report as attending regular Sunday worship service or regular church worship services, the least number of people is the state that gave us the gift of Bernie Sanders, New Hampshire. Only about 19% of people there self-report as attending regular worship services. The state that has the highest number of people who self-report as attending regular worship services, nearly 70% of the reddest state in the nation, South Carolina. That's just how it goes. When you turn blue, the church dwindles. When you turn red, the church thrives. And Colorado has turned blue.
Yeah, and I talked about some of the numbers in my monologue, but 64% of Coloradans consider themselves Christians, but only a third, actively go to church and engage in their religious activities. And of course, we've seen that dwindle a lot over the last few years, especially since Jared Polis took office. There seems to be a very intentional effort to target Christianity, to mock it, to make fun of us, to degrade our focus on our values and our commitment to our children and keeping them healthy and strong. And you highlighted a video this last week for us of a guy doing a speech at a church.
The reason that I've been focusing so much on Seven Mountains and Christian dominionism is because of how much we are all experiencing the effects of that here in Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs has become the epicenter for something known as a Seven Mountains Mandate movement. Now, this is a fuzzy interpretation of biblical prophecy that claims that when Christians control the 7 spheres of societal influence, Christ will return. They are literally trying to usher in the end of the world.
Just help our viewers understand this concept of Christian nationalism.
So Christian nationalists take the religious freedoms that are granted to us in the First Amendment, and they have weaponized it in hopes to gain religious preference, or should I say religious privilege, over everyone else in the United States. Christian nationalists don't represent Jesus or Christianity. They represent dominion. That's what they want, is power at all costs.
I realize that we've seen similar tactics used in fascist movements where complex issues are reduced to simple slogans or categories. Like Hitler and the Nazi Party used reductionism and oversimplified complex issues in their propaganda to promote their agenda and gain support. They used slogans and categories to create a simplified worldview that demonized certain groups, such as Jews and homosexuals and people with disabilities, and promoted their own nationalist and racist agenda.
The biggest threat that we face in the United States and in Colorado, it is the Christian nationalist movement.
Tell us a little bit about him. It's very creepy, and I encourage everyone to go watch it just so they can learn, but give us the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, maybe you can put it in the comments or something that people can just click and find it easily enough. The gentleman you're discussing, his name is Rob Rogers. I live in El Paso County, Colorado. I live in Colorado Springs. He is the first vice chairman of the El Paso County Democrat Party. So that kind of shows you where the party is headed, or where it is, let alone where it's headed. And he is one of these individuals, and there's lots of people like this out there, where Christians, especially white Christians, especially white heterosexual upper middle class Christians, are like the last people group that you can marginalize, denigrate, demoralize, name call. You can, it's green light, it's open season on Christians to the Democrat Party, which is always interesting to me, because if you ask most of those people if they're people of faith themselves, if they say yes, they claim to be Christian. You just highlighted the number. Was it 60% or something like that?
64.
It's 64. It's bizarre to me. You have people who will go out of their way. They will bend over backwards to defend the reputation of Islam, for instance. Bend over back. I mean, you remember when Bill O'Reilly said on was it what's the Squawking Hens show?
Oh, The View.
The View.
Yes.
Bill O'Reilly's on The View. This is years ago, and I remember this like it was yesterday. He said, on 9/11, America was attacked by Muslims, and they lost their minds. Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar got up and walked off the step. They were so offended. And I always wondered, what did he say that was not true? Right? I mean, he didn't say anything that wasn't true. But you have people on the left who will break their own back defending the reputation of a religion that they themselves don't even practice, yet have no problem attacking the faith that they do claim to practice. So this guy Rogers, he doesn't claim to practice Christianity. He's just the opposite of that. He is hell-bent on the idea of Christian nationalism and Christian dominionists determined to destroy and ruin our democracy. And he's on a one-man crusade to expose every church, pastor, ministry that can in any way be connected to political activism, and encouraging people to get out and vote their faith. Like that's a bad thing. But to somebody like him, it is a bad thing. So he's running around and he's nobody. I mean, he's first vice chair of a county party. I mean, he has no platform, but he's representative of an entire movement. And these people, they want people of faith like you and I, regardless of your skin color, regardless of your economic status, regardless of any of that stuff. If you're a person of Christian faith, they want you minimized, marginalized, muted, and completely removed from the discussion when it comes to how to govern our nation. They hate us.
Well, and that's nothing new for Christians. We've been dealing with this for a long time. But at this point in our history, in our society, why can't we celebrate our differences? Why can't we celebrate our ability to practice whatever religion we choose, which is part of the gift of America, correct? And religious freedom is so key to that. And it feels like they're just going right for the heart of that. Also with the cancel culture and a lot of the attacks on parents who are upset about what happens in the classroom, in the schools. And Derrick, I was called a mad mom on the campaign trail, and I would call you the mad dad who made it big on YouTube for a speech you gave at a school board meeting. Tell us about that.
Furious. I'll wear that label all day long. So I gave a speech. This is August of 21. Oh my goodness, it's coming up on 2 years this summer, concerning the introduction of critical race theory into the school district. And I said, first of all, I'm not oppressed. I am a direct descendant of the transatlantic slave trade. And I traced my ancestry back to my great-great-grandparents. All 16 of them were Black. I'm not oppressed. I travel across this country with no issues whatsoever. I go where I want, when I want. There is no neighborhood in this nation that I can't buy a house in, assuming I can afford it. There is no restaurant I can't order food in. There is no water fountain I can't get a drink from. I'm not oppressed. Now, that's not the same thing as saying there's no such thing as racism. Of course there is, but that's not the same thing. My children aren't oppressed, and I don't want my children taught that they are oppressed. And I don't want your children taught that they're the ones doing the oppressing. Why would we put that into the mind of a child? I've taught my kids just the opposite. Not that they're victims, but they're victors. They're overcomers. And you may run into people in life who don't like you because of the color of your skin. That's not your problem. That's their problem. And if it is your problem, you know what you got to do? You got to come in a little earlier. You got to stay a little later. You might have to work a little harder, but that you are in control of you, not them. And that's what these people don't understand, is that your racism doesn't affect me. It affects you. As long as you do no damage to my person, property, or family, your racism isn't affecting me. It's not oppressing me. Now, I'm not marginalizing racism. I don't want anyone to be a racist. That's a cancer that is eating their soul from the inside out, and I pray they get delivered from it. But as long as they're not doing me any damage, your racism doesn't affect me. So I stood up in school board and said, we do not want this CRT stuff in the classrooms. And now they hate my guts, which is really interesting because the left in America, I got more hate mail. You've seen it. They hate my guts. If I'd gotten up there and said, America stinks, America's implicitly biased, implicitly racist, Blacks can't get ahead, things are no better now than they were during Jim Crow. If I'd have done all that stuff, I would have gotten calls from CNN and MSNBC. But instead, I said what I said, and I got calls from Newsmax and Fox News. The left in America, for some reason, wants to believe it. They want to believe this is an awful nation where minorities cannot get ahead. They want to believe that's true. When you explain to me why, I'll be the second one to know. But they hated the fact that I gave that speech. But you know me, I really just don't care. If they don't like me, they can just turn the channel.
How many views did you get? It went big.
Impossible to say. On my personal YouTube, I got about 900,000. The guy who originally posted it on TikTok, the last time he communicated with me, which was over a year ago, he had 1.3 or 4 million. But then it went on Fox, it went on UK Daily Mail, it went everywhere. It's probably safe to say there's been over 20 or 30 million views, but I have no way of knowing.
Wow, Derrick. I mean, I think what that says to us is that people want truth. They want us to stand up and speak the truth. And that's part of why I did this podcast. I think it's why you're doing yours. We've got to cut through this nonsense and talk about real everyday life for us as Americans, as parents, as business owners. And right now, things are not going well. They're not going well. And for us Christians, we believe there's one person or entity that can cure brokenness, and that's God. And they're trying to remove it from our lives, from our schools, from our children's lives.
Yeah, it's not just that I don't have a faith system. It's that I don't have a faith system, and I don't want you to either. That's kind of the road they're walking. And this guy we're talking about is one of these people. We want it completely removed from society. Well, we can't remove it, in this case, faith in Christ, from society without removing the faith of the people in society, right? I mean, those are one and the same. So they just want it cleaved out of society in any way, shape they can. But what's amazing to me, and this is kind of where we started, is you look around the nation at places where Christianity is just hanging on by a thread, if not completely dead. How are they doing? San Francisco, my wife and I moved here from San Francisco Bay Area. My master's degree hanging on the wall right over there. My MBA is from the University of San Francisco. I know that city like the back of my hand. I could take you any place without a map or a GPS, no problem. One of the reasons we got out, I mean, I was a born again evangelical Christian then, and people that I worked with in Silicon Valley, they find out you go to church, they look at you like you have three eyes. Like you waste your hour and a half on Sundays going to listen to those made up stories. They can't believe it. They can't believe it. Yet you have to download an app to your phone to tell you which streets to not walk on today, because city hazmat crews are there cleaning up the human urine, feces, and spent needles. Right? They've thrown God overboard, and the city has gone to hell in a handbasket, and they cannot connect those dots. They simply will not connect those dots. And when you can explain that one, again, I want to be the second person to hear.
Yeah, I agree, Derrick. And I think, you live in El Paso County, which is home to a lot of, really incredible churches and church communities. And it's starting to turn bluer, as we saw in last fall in the election. Pastors are getting more fearful about speaking out. I think there are some very strong pastors in Colorado Springs that speak out, but how do we support our pastors and our church community as Christians? Maybe we aren't that involved or that close to our pastor. What can we do in your eyes to reinforce their ability to speak up and stand strong against these attacks?
Well, you're right about Colorado Springs. And to touch on that point, it's the natural path of the growth of cities. The larger a city gets, the more blue it becomes. That's just the way that it is. Colorado Springs is a second city, right? We're not New York, Atlanta, Miami, Chicago. We're a second city. We're on our way to becoming a first city. But even as a second city, and Tulsa's the same way, pretty solidly red 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 300, 325, 350,000 people. Now we're crowding 500,000 people, and we're getting more and more blue all the time. And you've heard me talk about that. In fact, I'll talk about it now. So if you look at and I'm completely dismissing your question. Sorry about that.
No, you go.
If you look at the cities around this nation, and I draw these parallels when I'm talking about the condition of the Black community, but just in general, Chicago, Illinois has had a Democrat mayor for over 70 years, just replaced a far left one with someone even further left. Chicago has a 50-member city council, 50. The current makeup of the Chicago City Council, 46 Democrats, 4 independents, 0 Republicans.
Wow.
St. Louis has had a Democrat mayor for over 50 years, has a 28-member city council. The current makeup of that council, 28 Democrats, 0 Republicans. Both Baltimore, Maryland, and Seattle have 15-member city councils. They both had Democrat mayors for over 50 years. Both of those city councils are 15 Democrats, 0 Republicans. San Francisco, 11-member city council, 11 Democrats, 0 Republicans, Democrat mayor since the beginning of time. Detroit, Michigan, 9-member city council, 9 Democrats, 0 Republicans. They're all the same. New Orleans, 7-member city council, 7 Democrats, 0 Republicans, hasn't had a Democrat mayor since your mom and dad were not even on this planet yet.
Wow. They're
all the same. So it isn't that the conservatives don't have a seat at the table, can't really get legislation through. No, there aren't any. Literally none, 0. They don't exist. Not at the city level, not at the county level. All the representatives in the state house, all the representatives in the state senate, all the representatives in the federal house. The only ones that have a Republican are states where there is a statewide elected official like the governor or a senator. Other than that, you look at the major cities in our country, there is no conservative representation in any of them. Now in Colorado Springs, as you mentioned, we have the advantage of being a ministry hotbed. Navigators, David C. Cook, Focus on the Family, Every Home for Christ, Bibles Across America, all that stuff is located here. And we've got some very large, powerful, and influential churches. And to answer your question, congregants, members of the church, communicate with your pastor and let them know that this church needs to take a stand for righteousness, right? The IRS is not our source. If they want to threaten us with revocation of our 501c3 status, which never happens, by the way, it's nothing but a threat. It never happens. But if they want to threaten to take it away, you know what? Bring it on. Jay Sekulow, there are all kinds of legal organizations that will provide free representation anytime the IRS wants to pick that fight. And the IRS doesn't want to pick that fight because they never win. So we need to stand on the righteousness and the seriousness and the truth of the word of God and not be bullied by people who are going to wave a piece of paper claiming separation of church and state, which doesn't exist either.
So how do we get pastors more engaged? How do we get them to speak up and speak out and really stand firm on their principles in politics?
I don't know how you do it. I know how I do it. I do it with face-to-face one-on-one meetings. I've got 2 next week with pastors here in District 20, the school district I live in, to show them exactly what's going on in our schools, at our state legislature, and then compare and contrast that with the word of God that you preach on Sunday. And if those don't line up, if you're saying one thing on Sunday and allowing people to vote a different way on Tuesday, you're doing a disservice to your congregation, right? Jesus was not afraid of political leaders at all. I mean, he marched right into that den of thieves and smacked them down. And Pastor, you need to be willing to do the same thing, Pastor. You really do.
Well, and 1 in 3 Christians nationwide don't vote very often. That's really, really sad, especially when politics runs our culture right now and they are so influential, politicians are, and what happens in our schools, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our small businesses, in our families. So it's really a tipping point right now, I think, and why I talked so much about Letter to the American Church, which Eric Metaxas wrote recently. I read the book and I just thought it had such a strong, clear message about a similar moment in time when the German church wouldn't stand up against Nazis and Hitler. And he's warning us that that's happening right now, right before our eyes. And if we don't stand up as Christians, we will lose our country, which was founded, on a faith in God. And so we shouldn't be shy about fighting for those principles. In fact, now is the time to be bold and speak up and take action. And what are you afraid of? A little hardcore messaging on social media? I've been through that over the last couple of years. It's not a big deal. You move on.
Absolutely. They're going to beat both you and I up over this podcast won't be up for more than an hour. That's and right. There'll be comments and it'll already be circulating and look at these radicals and all that stuff. That's par for the course. They have to paint us as some sort of right-wing fanatic radicals in order to sell what they're selling. Because what we're selling is faith in God, strength of family. I mean, core foundational things that build society. They're selling just the opposite. So they have to paint us as some sort of unhinged radicals. And if a pastor is afraid of that, get over it, man. If you can't get over it, you might not be in the right profession. This is no time for the timid.
Yeah, that's so true.
This isn't time for the timid. This is the time to take the fight where it belongs, on the streets. We got to vote with our feet. We got to burn some shoe leather, and we have to restore a modicum of righteousness to our government. And amazingly, there are people who don't want that.
We've got to stand strong with our faith. We've got to stand strong as parents and support each other. And as Christians, we've got to speak boldly about our beliefs and how we want our children to be raised, and do it unapologetically.
Bingo. Bingo. Cannot be ashamed, cannot take a step backwards. They have cornered the Christian population to the place now where a lot of people don't even want to admit it in public, right? They've marginalized. It was not that long ago. Being a person of faith, particularly of the Christian faith, was virtuous in this nation. It was virtuous if you were running for office, that you went to church and that you wore that on your sleeve. Now they flipped it completely around. Now they're assigning virtue to LGBTQ and all these other different marginalized groups and so on. There's virtue there. And if you are a person of faith, you are inherently a bigot of some sort. That's the narrative that they're selling, and it works so well that you have Christians who don't even want to admit it in public. Do you go to church? Well, I don't know. We've got to get away from that and not have any fear whatsoever. I'm proud that I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ and that the church and the Bible is at the core of my family's existence. I'm proud of that. And it's worked pretty well for me and my family.
You have amazing children, by the way. They are super successful, off the charts, super successful.
They're indescribable. That's a show in and of itself.
Well, I'm so proud to call you a friend and so happy to have you on the show. We'll bring you back to do a full episode on education and how we can fix that in Colorado. That's a big, big topic. But Derrick, keep up the great work and keep exposing these folks who want to do terrible things to Colorado and to us as Christians, to us as parents, to us as just people who love our state and want the best things for our children.
You and that husband of yours owe me a rib and brisket dinner for this.
Bingo. We've got it. We've got it right down the street here. Whenever you want to come up to our neighborhood, we'll feed you some great barbecue. You
heard it, Colorado. You heard her. I got a free dinner coming.
All right. And Derrick, tell us again what the name of your podcast is and how often it comes out.
Red Ink, youtube.com/@redink1. And I usually do 1 or 2 a week. I'm trying not to beat people up. So I don't do it daily. I usually will put up 1 or 2 a week, just depending upon topics and what's happening. And I keep mine to 15-ish minutes.
You always have great things to say, and I learn a lot from my conversations with you. So thanks, Derrick. Have a wonderful week, and we'll keep the battle on in Colorado.